Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. My name is Scott Reeves. I'm with the Engineering and Construction Department at the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and I am delighted to have you join me here today as we take a virtual walking tour of one of the recently completed segments of the San Francisco Bay Trail located at our Ravenswood Open Space Preserve. The San Francisco Bay Trail is a planned 500-mile regional trail system that touches 47 cities through a broad spectrum of landscapes that ring the bay. It is a bold vision for commuting, recreation, and environmental stewardship. And with gaps still outstanding in 30% of the system, no simple projects remain. And Ravenswood certainly was no exception. After 15 years and $5 million, we have finally closed a critical 0.6-mile gap in the system to connect 80 contiguous miles of shoreline trail. I would like to walk you through the project today from start to finish. We'll touch on planning, permitting, design, bidding, and construction. And because we opened this trail segment in August of 2020, I have a little bit of visitation data to share with you and our initial impacts from COVID. Let's jump in. The Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, or Midpen, is a unique public agency representing approximately 700,000 constituents in 17 cities across 3 counties in the heart of Silicon Valley. We were formed in 1972 as a grassroots voter initiative to protect the green foothills of Santa Clara County. A few years later, the voters of San Mateo County expanded the district onto the peninsula, and then in 2004 onto the coast side. Our district is primarily funded by property taxes.
Midpen helps plants, animals, and people thrive throughout the greater Santa Cruz Mountains by preserving a connected greenbelt of public open space. Our missions can be summarized in 5 words: preserve, protect, restore, educate, and enjoy. Our efforts are ever expanding. We are now managing over 65,000 acres of permanently dedicated open space within 26 preserves, and we offer over 245 miles of trails free to explore year-round. In 1987, Senate Bill 100 directed the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, to develop a plan for a regional trail system. The Bay Trail Plan, as it was formerly known, was adopted in July 1989 and included a proposed alignment, a set of policies and design guidelines, and strategies for implementation and financing. The planned 500-mile walking and cycling path around the entire San Francisco Bay will ultimately run through all 9 Bay Area counties, 47 cities, and across the region's 7 toll bridges. With over 350 miles now in place, the Bay Trail provides connection to open spaces, facilitates alternative commuting, and encourages healthy lifestyles. The Bay Trail has long been part of the Ravenswood Preserve, located here on the existing levee. But due to title fingers and property rights, it had no outlet or connection to the north. It terminated at a lookout. It was in poor condition and difficult to maintain. Through our ADA self-evaluation process, several ADA barriers were also identified. In 2014, Midpen voters passed a $300 million bond measure, known as Measure AA, to support 25 top priorities of natural resource protection and outdoor recreation. Among these top priorities was to improve the Ravenswood Trail and close the critical gap to connect 80 contiguous miles of Bay Trail. We are very fortunate to have this funding support because it makes costly and complex projects like this one feasible. Ravenswood Open Space is a 376-acre waterfront tidal marsh preserve. It is directly adjacent to the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge and the Baylands Nature Preserve. It is one of our most urban preserves, located right along the commuter corridors of Highways 101 and 84. Ravenswood Preserve is completely surrounded by tidal fingers. Because of this, the Bay Trail, which runs through the preserve, has no outlet to the north. It terminates here at our north observation platform, thus generating a 0.6-mile critical gap in the Bay Trail that we're talking about today. Our preserve straddles San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, as well as the cities of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. Our neighbors include private residences, the San Francisco Public Utility Commission valve lots, and their associated infrastructure including the Hetch Hetchy pipelines, the San Mateo County Transit District's Dumbarton Rail Line, and PG&E's high-voltage overhead transmission lines. We're also immediately adjacent to several large tech campuses. Ravenswood Preserve has always been a thriving locale, from a lonely daily life to a gold rush era town. In 1848, a 1,500-foot wharf was built here to access the relatively deep bay water. A few years later, a town was also established with the hope that the Central Pacific Railroad would choose Ravenswood as a terminus for its rail line, but the railroad ultimately went to Oakland instead, and Redwood City, not Ravenswood, became San Mateo County's most important port. Eventually, the wharf fell into disrepair, and the area was later used as a county dump site. In the 1950s, the Leslie Salt Company turned the marsh into a salt production pond by surrounding it with levees to keep out the tides. Midpen purchased the property from the Leslie Salt Company in 1981 and opened Ravenswood Preserve to the public in 1989. Restoration of the tidal landscape was completed in 2001, allowing bay water to once again actively flow in and out of the rich network of sloughs and channels so that the marsh may naturally rebuild itself. Lush salt marshes like this one once ringed the bay, but today only about 10% of those original marshlands remain because of human activities. These native wetlands provide an important buffer for high tide events and rising sea levels. They provide habitat for a wide variety of animals, like crabs, shrimp, fish, birds, and mammals, including 2 endangered species, the Ridgway's rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse. The project was conceived in 2005 when the San Francisco Bay Trail Gap Analysis identified this gap as a critical long-term project, estimating an 11 to 15-year timeline to complete, citing significant challenges in property rights and environmental restrictions. The 2005 study estimated the cost to close the 0.6-mile gap was $2.76 million. Midpen was just a stakeholder at this time because the trail would connect to our Ravenswood Preserve. That study initiated the next step in the project, which was a feasibility study to be completed by the City of Menlo Park. This study sought to explore and find the final trail alignment. It had a ton of support from local stakeholders to regional and federal agencies. Many alignments were considered in the vicinity and even further north into the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge. Ultimately, though, the location through SFPUC property was determined to have the most benefits to both people and the land because of its already existing infrastructure and permanent impacts. But at that time, no agency had the means to lead the project, and there was no trail easement through the SFPUC property. That is until SFPUC contacted Midpen to acquire a tunnel easement under Ravenswood Preserve to complete a new Hetch Hetchy pipeline project. After much deliberation, it was determined that there was a mutual need and opportunity, and an easement exchange was negotiated. SFPUC granted Midpen a 50-foot wide open space easement within which we would need to find the final alignment. In exchange, Midpen granted a tunnel easement to SFPUC. CEQA was initiated and project details started to be developed. In 2016, Midpen finalized the easement exchange by narrowing the open space easement down to a 20-foot wide trail easement and started to refine uses, management, hours, and design details. This is probably a good time to talk about how we partnered with the public and other agencies, because that would ultimately shape the outcome of the project. Public engagement and agency negotiations happen concurrently to our easement exchange, which is a bit out of sequence for us. Those steps usually happen first. And with so many site constraints, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for design collaboration, but we knew we need a lot of support from the public and our partner agencies to get this one done. Suffice to say that we worked very hard to gather as much input as possible by meeting the community in their neighborhood. We listened to and mitigated their concerns, which primarily revolved around the proximity of the trail to their backyards and how we were going to preserve their privacy and security. Similarly, SFPUC shared concerns of introducing the public into this space, from the security of their valve lots as well as the operational logistics of their service roads. So there was much deliberation about fencing, gates, and the management of the trail. Straddling multiple jurisdictions, there needed to be a clear understanding of responsibilities and boundaries in order for the trail to operate successfully. Ultimately, it was decided that Midpen would manage the trail and be responsible for construction, repair, maintenance, and regular patrols. East Palo Alto Police Department would be responsible for emergency responses. This led to discussions in the hours of operations and balancing the needs of our neighbors with the needs of commuters. Nearly every Midpen preserve opens at a half an hour before sunrise and closes at half an hour after sunset every day of the year. In the wintertime, this means that our preserves are only open from about 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Knowing and wanting this trail to be a usable commuter route, we determined that extended hours would be warranted, so we set special hours here from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. year-round. And because of the security concerns raised by our neighbors, we decided that automatic gates would control access at the two public trailheads. All of this was memorialized in a memorandum of understanding with East Palo Alto. The MOU also determined that Midpen would facilitate collaboration between the City of East Palo Alto and the SFPUC on future connections, as the city has a specific plan for the region seen here that includes a spur trail from Bay Road around the University Village development to the Bay Trail, as well as a linear park through the Hetch Hetchy right-of-way. This partnering also prompted us to establish a joint permitting agreement with the cities of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. Because we were straddling their jurisdictions, we determined that East Palo Alto would be the lead local permitting agency on all aspects of the project. Through the planning and partnering process, we were able to hone in on a well-defined project description. It included 800 feet of asphalt sidewalk repair from the existing Ravenswood parking lot, a new solar-powered automatic trail gate at the existing Ravenswood Bridge, 1.2 miles of levee trail improvements, including asphalt paving with gravel shoulders, 0.2 miles of new elevated boardwalk, an 86-foot-long prefabricated steel bridge, 0.1 miles of new asphalt trail paving, 0.3 miles of gravel shoulder improvements along the existing SFPUC service road, including traffic striping and signage, an improved trailhead at University Avenue, including crosswalk, striping, signage, a new vehicular gate, and another solar-powered automatic trail gate, 400 feet of new sidewalk improvements along University Avenue, connecting the University Village neighborhood to our trailhead, site security fencing and gates along the Samtrans Dunbarton rail line corridor, and high tide refuge islands and transition zones in Ravenswood Marsh. As an interesting aside, I think we did a really good job messaging our 0.6 mile gap closure, which is this portion of the project here. But as you can see, the project was so much more. We actually did about 2.25 miles of total trail improvements. I should start off this portion by acknowledging that this project was very desirable from a funding perspective and satisfied the initiatives of a lot of different agencies. Once we were able to get the project started with seed funding and our bond initiative, we were able to qualify for several grants. For starters, approximately 75% of East Palo Alto is designated as a disadvantaged community, and the rest is designated as low income. East Palo Alto is also designated as severely park poor. The Quimby Act of 1975 sets a statewide target goal of 3 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. The city falls well below this ratio at 0.83 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. In fact, it has the lowest ratio of municipal parks per capita in San Mateo County for a city of equivalent density. East Palo Alto is very small in area. All of the residents live within 2 miles of this site. The project offered to increase direct access to open space here, as well as connect the residents to regional open spaces without using a car. And by completing the gap in the commuter route, the project could demonstrate offsets in greenhouse gas emissions and reductions in vehicle congestion and air pollution. We received funding from the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, the County of San Mateo, Facebook, California Natural Resources Agency, County of Santa Clara, and Caltrans. I think there were a couple lessons learned here for us. One, it's possible to take seed funding and leverage that to find other sources of funding. Also, it is important to recognize the amount of time required to manage grants. We could never have accepted this amount of grant funding unless we had a team of administrators to help implement. This project required the full suite of regulatory permits from regional up to the federal level, including the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, or BCDC, an agency we typically don't permit with because we have very little bayfront work. As you can see from this final mitigation table, all regulators seem to agree that the permanent conversion of habitat from the introduction of the boardwalk into the marsh environment would require mitigations. The amount of mitigation was determined by the square footage of each individual post installed into the marsh, the shading that the boardwalk would cast over marsh plants, and the conversion of marsh habitat into a tidal finger from the weight of construction equipment moving back and forth through the work zone. The mitigations included purchasing tidal wetland mitigation credits from the San Francisco Bay Wetland Mitigation Bank and making high tide refuge habitat enhancements in the transition zones and in refuge islands. This exhibit shows our proposed mitigation high tide refuge habitat enhancements in green. Our transition zones are shown here along the marsh side of the existing levee trail in 3 locations. And our refuge islands are shown here and here, approximately 200 to 300 feet away from the levee trail into the marsh. Here's an example of a transition zone enhancement. They're located on the marsh side of the existing levee trail. They're approximately 50 feet in length and comprised of native plantings and weed eradication. And here's an example of our high tide refuge islands, which are small raised earthen mounds planted with marsh gum plant and saltgrass to mimic slough channels. They are constructed slightly above the high tide elevation to provide refuge for small mammals during high tide events, and they're located at least 200 to 300 feet into the marsh, well away from human interaction. Later on in my presentation, I'll talk more about how they're constructed. Returning to our project impacts and proposed mitigations exhibit, I wanted to talk about all those little dots shown in the marsh. Those are confirmed observations of ridgeways rails. I think it's pretty clear that we have suitable breeding habitat here. This was confirmed through our consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biological opinion, which determined that any construction within 700 feet of the marsh needed to be completed between September 1st and January 31st so as to avoid the breeding season. And here's how that impacted our project. Everything east of this line fell within that seasonal restriction zone, including most of the boardwalk construction and all of our levee trail asphalt paving. Through our consultation with BCDC, it became clear that we would need to elevate the boardwalk to account for future sea level rise. This raised concerns about introducing the public into this area and the visual impacts to 3 properties in closest proximity to the boardwalk, located here. Although the boardwalk would only be raised a few feet above the ground in this location, there would be potential for the public to see into these backyards given the low height and poor condition of the existing fence. The initial solution was to construct a solid 7-foot-tall visual barrier along the south side of the boardwalk to enhance privacy. That would have been located here. Not only costly to install, we felt this would be an easy target for vandalism. It would create a blind corner for cyclists and an obstruction of bay views from the boardwalk. Through a simple sightline analysis, we determined that a viable and less costly alternative was to replace the existing fence with a taller good neighbor fence. Considering the entirety of the existing fence was in disrepair, we felt this was a mutually beneficial solution. And this was only amplified by the amount of vagrancy and vandalism reported along this fence line. All of these hiding places and all of the trash were removed in the process. And our intent was not to dispute property boundaries or ownership of the fence, so it was reconstructed in the exact same location with the exact same responsibilities for maintenance and repair. We did enter into an agreement with each owner to memorialize this understanding and to allow for temporary entrance into each property to complete construction. This is a great example of a public-private partnership at work.
I think that there's a couple insights and lessons learned that I can share regarding our approach to bidding. We understand that our projects are complex and they're often in hard to reach locations with permit restrictions that can make them challenging to build. And so it's hard for us to find qualified contractors to bid our work. And that's why contractor outreach is so important to us during the bid phase. And we do this in several ways. We often host meet and greets with contractors to help them learn about our upcoming projects and how to bid our work. We will also send direct emails to qualified contractors to get a specific project in front of them to look at. And we will also try to learn from other projects that have come before us so that we can avoid pitfalls or mistakes. And for the Ravenswood project, we are fortunate enough to follow one season behind the city of Palo Alto in their Lucy Evans Boardwalk reconstruction project. In fact, we were on the same schedule just 1 year later, where we were trying to bid in the spring, award the contract in summer, and then start the project on September 1st when our seasonal restriction would lift, and complete the project by January 31st when the seasonal restriction ended. From that project, we were able to find a qualified pool of contractors to reach out to raise awareness about our bid. But more importantly, we had extensive conversations with the city of Palo Alto to learn everything that we could about their project, understanding that because of the seasonal restriction window, we couldn't afford any pitfalls or delays or mistakes, which would kick our project out into 2 seasons of construction. And the most important lesson that we learned from the city was that they had a significant delay in the delivery of their Alaskan yellow cedar lumber, which is the substructure to the boardwalk. This was apparently due to a prolonged submittal period, along with delays in the actual material delivery. It comes from all the way from British Columbia. And the city took delivery in November, and it made it very difficult for them to complete the project by January 31st, and we couldn't afford that. So, taking this as a lesson learned, we took the submittal package for that Alaskan yellow cedar lumber and we moved it into our bid package so that our bidders were required to provide those submittals along with the rest of their bid package. And we reviewed those submittals concurrent with our contract award process so that when we returned a fully executed contract, we also returned fully reviewed Alaskan yellow cedar submittals, allowing them to order the material immediately. And so in our project, we took delivery of the cedar in the beginning of October, and it saved us time and enabled us to complete that portion of Boardwalk by January 31st. Before we jump into talking about the different aspects of our project and how we actually constructed them, I wanted to touch on our relationship to our contractors. We really see this as a collaborative partnership. We understand that the contractor is entering the equation at the very final step and asked to implement, but they don't have the legacy of knowledge or conversations that happened before them, especially related to our permit restrictions. And we really see it as our role in the partnership to keep the permit regulations in the forefront and boil those down to simple terms for our contractor to allow them to focus on means and methods. And we're also very hands-on in this way because it guarantees that we can stay compliant with our permits. I think it's also important to note our overarching approach to construction, which is to have the lightest touch on the land possible, where we try to really minimize the amount of impact. A common theme you'll see today is the narrow work zone afforded to our contractor when working in the marsh environment. And although very challenging at times, it helped us minimize both our temporary and permanent impacts and facilitate our permits and our mitigations, which can be very costly to us.
All right, we're going to take a bit of a virtual walking tour now, heading north from our preserved trailhead to touch on a few of the different and interesting construction activities that took place. Let's start with the asphalt paving operation. Not normally a very interesting construction activity, but paving the levee trail proved challenging because the only way onto the levee was over the existing Ravenswood Bridge. It is only 10 feet wide and rated for 5-ton traffic, severely limiting the size of paving equipment a contractor could use. To pave 1.2 miles of trail with equipment small and light enough to use this bridge would have taken at least 8 months. And as a reminder, this work was within our seasonal restriction zone, which only afforded us 5 winter months to get the job done. The contractor's solution was to temporarily remove the bridge and install a 75-ton, 20-foot wide construction bridge that would clear span the abutments to avoid any loading issues. This is the existing bridge being removed and carefully set aside for the temporary bridge to be installed. It was a very calculated work activity, down to the location of the crane, where to assemble the temporary bridge, where to store the existing bridge, and how to do it without any collateral damage to the environment or surrounding improvements. And the contractor needed to work quickly too, because Bay Road would only be closed for one afternoon. And once in place, the temporary bridge allowed fully loaded asphalt trucks carrying 25 tons of material to roll into Ravenswood Preserve. From there, the contractor set off to pave 1.2 miles of levee trail around the Ravenswood Marsh. The levee offered a narrow work zone with little margin for error. All construction activities started at the furthest point from the bridge, and the contractor built their way out. And with no turnaround locations, the contractor had to back up their vehicles 1.2 miles to deliver materials. The average backup time was about 30 minutes. This is where we could have benefited from some additional temporary impacts in our permits to allow for turnarounds and passing zones. Here were the typical pre-construction existing conditions. And here's the finished product, an 8-foot wide trail with 2-foot gravel shoulders that meets our easy access trail standards. Continuing on our virtual walking tour, we are still on the preserve levee trail, now in the northern section of our preserve near the new boardwalk. Before we hop on the boardwalk, let's look east over the tidal marsh towards the San Francisco Bay and talk about how the marsh functions and what that means for wildlife. During high tide events, the marsh floods with water, and wildlife like the ridgeways rail and salt marsh harvest mouse are pushed to higher ground. They become exposed during these high tide periods and are more vulnerable to predation unless they find vegetation to hide beneath. They seek refuge under native shrubby plants like marsh gum plant. And here's what an extreme high tide, or a king tide, looks like at Ravenswood Preserve. As mentioned previously, we constructed 2 types of wildlife refuge mitigations as part of this project: transition zone enhancements and refuge islands. Both support endangered species during high tide events. Enhancements to transition zones, or the side slopes of the levee, occur above the mean high tide mark. Plants can grow here as they are only sporadically inundated with saltwater. And here's a lesson learned in adaptive maintenance. After 1 year, we've learned that our plantings are very popular with the local rabbit population, and that we needed to install browse protection. I also wanted to point out an interesting detail in this photo. We've intentionally left gaps in all of our straw wattles because we didn't want to create any barriers for potential salt marsh harvest mice that would be crossing our levee trail. All right, now I'd like to see if you can spot our second type of high tide mitigation, the refuge islands. If you guessed that tiny speck back there, then you would do well as a salt marsh harvest mouse. The refuge islands are constructed several hundred feet out into the marsh. Temporary plywood sheets are used to support people and wheelbarrows. They prevent the formation of trails that might lead predators to the new islands. The paths are removed once construction is complete. The first step in creating a refuge island is to remove the top 5 inches of existing marsh vegetation and roots and set that layer aside. The next step is to collect mud from a nearby channel and use that to build a mound to the specific elevation above the mean high tide line. Finally, you take that harvested layer of vegetation and place that back on top of the new island mound, and then plant more natives like marsh gum plant and saltgrass. At this point in our walking tour, we're going to jump onto the newly constructed boardwalk. This is where the 0.6 mile gap closure begins. We will head west out of our preserve and across SFPUC land within our trail easement. And here's that westerly view before the boardwalk was constructed. The boardwalk held some challenges for us. First, our permits only allowed our footprint of permanent impacts to be the exact same width as our boardwalk. That meant that our wildlife exclusion fence, which would contain all of our contractors' activities, needed to be laid out by a surveyor because it was to be the exact same width and in the exact same location as the boardwalk. It would have been nice to have additional buffer space to facilitate construction, but as a district, we're always striving for the lightest touch on the land. We did check the contractor's layout with a third-party survey because the alignment also needed to fit within the recorded trail easement boundary. A lesson learned here would be to wait to record the easement until after construction was completed to account for any variances encountered during construction. Once the exclusion fence was in and confirmed to be in the correct location, the challenges of a narrow linear project began. A lot of time was spent each day traveling out and back from the marsh. The first step was to install the boardwalk piles. Our permits only allowed vibratory methods to drive the piles. So the contractor fabricated a fully adjustable jig that would install 90% of the piles. The jig was held by a small piece of equipment while a mini excavator vibrated the piles into place. One constant threat with vibratory equipment is hydraulic fluid leak. Our contractor had spill containment controls in place and a mechanic on site to check the equipment proactively to prevent spills. In all, 242 cedar posts were installed up to 26 feet in depth to support the boardwalk. Yellow cedar was used from British Columbia because of its ability to withstand the corrosive salt conditions without preservatives or chemicals. We had full-time biomonitoring supervision for all construction activities on the ground, and whether luck or skill, we didn't have any issues with wildlife. We even had a resident rail come inspect our work on low tide mornings. This did require brief stand-downs, but the contractor was usually back to work within 30 minutes. And in our contract, we had an allowance and a description for when the contractor would qualify for stand-down time compensation. Once the piles were in place, the contractor began prefabricating the remaining substructure in their staging area, and this was for a couple of reasons. We didn't want any debris or sawdust escaping into the marsh, but they also just didn't have any laydown space within the exclusion fence. This proved to be an efficient and accurate way to complete the work. The superstructure is all redwood. The contractor continued fabricating components in their staging area where feasible, and for the site cutting, they set up cutting stations using tarps and tables and waste bins, so there was no material escape into the marsh. The final boardwalk is 10 feet wide and almost a quarter mile long, and 700 feet of that length is located within the seasonal restriction zone, which means it was completed between September 1st and January 31st. There are 3 overlook areas with bench seating and educational panels. Continuing on our virtual walking tour west, we come to a seasonal pond and our prefabricated bridge. This is where our largest field change occurred. Each bridge abutment is supported by 4 piles. The piles were designed to be concrete, but that was not compatible with the vibratory installation method stipulated by our permits. We had to change the pile type to steel in the field. This caused delays and additional costs. The pile installation went so smoothly that some of the beams sank into the mud over 40 feet in depth without needing vibration. The bridge installation itself went very smoothly. We were fortunate to enter into an access agreement with a neighboring private property that provided us access into this area through their vacant land. It gave us a large staging area to assemble and install the bridge. This is another example of how the neighbors worked with us to get this project done. All right, let's do a quick map check as we're nearly at the end of our virtual walking tour. We've crossed the bridge, we've exited our seasonal restriction zone, and we've reached the end of our boardwalk. Our trail transitions to an asphalt surface with gravel shoulders, similar to the levee trail. And consistent with all the trails we've walked along to this point, this segment is fully ADA accessible and designated as one of our easy access trails. It is marked with traffic striping and signage to facilitate safe bicycle commuter use. As we keep walking west, the trail meets up with and shares a portion of the existing SFPUC service road. We get a lot of questions about our trailhead gates. They are solar powered and they open and close automatically every day. They come equipped with a manual push button to open the gates from inside if someone is inadvertently closed in after hours. And here's what that installation looks like. The battery, controller, and operator are all housed in a metal enclosure that is vandal resistant with only a 4-inch slot that allows the gate arm to operate. The enclosure has front and top doors that open completely to allow maintenance access to all of the components. And now we've reached the west end of our construction project at the new trailhead at University Avenue, where the second automatic gate was installed. It's important to note that this entrance is intended for commuters and neighbors, so there's no parking offered. From here, trail users can turn right and head north to stay on the Bay Trail, or turn left and head south using the newly constructed crosswalk and sidewalk to reach the University Village neighborhood or head into East Palo Alto. Midpen has been monitoring visitation numbers at our preserves for a number of years in order to track trends, seek funding, guide management policies, and establish success criteria. We use several different tools to count our visitors. For hikers, we typically use a trail counter with an infrared sensor. And for bicycles, we use a magnetic sensor. As seen here, we use cloud-based software to centrally locate and manage the datasets. At Ravenswood, we've had a trail counter at our Bay Road entrance since 2015. And after construction wrapped in August 2020, we installed a bicycle counter at this location as well to support, among other things, our current electric bike pilot study. What you see here is the trail counter. It's sandwiched between two pieces of wood and hidden from sight. The back piece of wood can be loosened to rotate and provide access to the sensor. We do tend to have occasional issues with our sensors not registering counts. Sometimes they go offline and need to be restarted, and other times they need calibration to dial in their sensitivity. This is especially true for our bicycle counters, which are magnetometers, and bikes can have a wide array of metal components nowadays, from all steel to all carbon fiber. Here's a monthly view of our Ravenswood data from 2015 to present, hikers in blue and bicycles in green. You can see seasonal trend waves from 2015 to 2019, peaking each summer, and then a 4x increase in visitation since construction was completed. The increase in usage can be attributed to several factors, including the ability to travel through the preserve now rather than just out and back, the newness of the boardwalk and associated amenities for birdwatching, and the ADA barriers that were removed. But all of our preserves have seen a remarkable jump in visitation during the pandemic, especially when travel restrictions, social distancing, and stay-at-home orders became most strict. And time will really tell whether increased visitation numbers are to be sustained. We are most curious to see how bicycle commuter traffic changes post-COVID with this new route now available to the tech campuses in Silicon Valley. We'll be watching that closely.
Well, that about wraps up our walking tour. I'd like to summarize some of the high-level points that we talked about along the way. But before we do that, I thought I would answer two questions that we seem to be asked most frequently now that this trail segment is open. And the first question is, why did it take so long? And I think the answer is simple. Projects of this complexity, they just take time. When ABAG first identified this critical gap, they estimated an 11 to 15 year time frame to close it, and it really took us all of 15 years to do so. When you layer environmental restrictions on top of property right issues, you're basically threading a needle. And we feel very fortunate that we were able to thread that needle in 15 years. At every step along the way, there were issues and roadblocks that could have derailed us, but they didn't. The second question that we seem to be asked frequently is, why was it so expensive? And I think, again, the answer here is people associate a 0.6 mile trail gap with a $5 million price tag. But in fact, our project was so much more. It was 2.25 miles of improvements. But beyond that, our projects are complex and they take a long time to complete. And there's a lot of soft costs associated with that. So I think a lesson learned here is to strategize ways to help the public understand the complexities of these projects and understand that they come with a large price tag and that they come with a long time frame to complete.
The total project cost was $5.4 million. This included our construction costs, our staff time, our consultant time, our technical studies, our feasibility studies, and our inspections. The overall schedule to complete the project was 15 years start to finish. The overall length of improvements installed was 2.25 miles. This included the asphalt levee trail, the boardwalk, and all of our sidewalks. The CEQA level on this project was an initial study, mitigated negative declaration. And to summarize the most important lessons that we learned along the way, number one, don't rely on continuity of knowledge. Write everything down and memorialize progress with agreements and understandings. These projects take a long time to complete, and staff turnover can be a big setback. Strive to document all of the steps along the way. Number two, get creative when looking for a solution and always keep an open mind. For us, that creativity and open-mindedness came when we were able to negotiate an easement exchange with SFPUC. Number three, take a collaborative partnership approach with everyone. We found the public to be a key partner for us, along with SFPUC, the City of East Palo Alto, and the project contractors. Number four, meet the community in their neighborhood to involve them in the process. Life is hectic right now and people are busy. Their input is critical, but it needs to come at the right time in the project. And number five, think about and account for construction logistics in your regulatory permits. On this project, we could have benefited from more passing zones and turnaround areas in all of our narrow work zones. Number six, use work plans during construction to promote planning, communication, and collaboration with the contractor. Work plans are submittals that describe upcoming activities. They combine plan or aerial markups with written narratives and encourage the contractor to fully plan out and communicate the logistics of an activity. For us, they allowed us to demonstrate permit compliance to the regulating agencies as well. Number seven, include a bid allowance and clear description for stand-down time compensation. These type of projects will have hidden complexities that won't reveal themselves until construction begins. And along the same lines as a contingency budget, having a clear understanding of how and when the contractor qualifies for stand-down time compensation will encourage them to always have a backup plan in place. Number eight, investigate and identify long lead items early in the project so you can stay ahead of avoidable delays. And number nine, budget time and dollars for adaptive maintenance after the project is complete and the site begins to be used. This is a budgeting item that is sometimes overlooked.
Well, that's about all the time that we have today. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned a little something about our Ravenswood Open Space Preserve and the San Francisco Bay Trail system. I'm going to leave you with a little bit of footage that we've collected over the past 9 months that encapsulates the beauty out at Ravenswood, along with a message from our partner agencies that helped us bring this project over the finish line. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me or check our website, openspace.org, for more information about Ravenswood and all of our preserves. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll see you out on the trails.
Because this is the only Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District preserve on the bay, I'm especially pleased with the completion of this project that connects visitors and residents to birdwatching hikes on an uninterrupted 80-mile stretch of the Bay Trail. Thanks to the generosity and foresight of voters who approved Measure AA, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District was able to be the lead planning and funding agency to bring the Ravenswood Bay Trail to completion and, more importantly, to the public.
Hello, I'm State Senator Jerry Hill, and I'm delighted to celebrate the opening of the Ravenswood Bay Trail with all of you. This small but mighty segment is an important link in the 80-mile Bay Trail that connects our communities to nature. I'm so pleased that the state of California was able to provide a $1 million urban greening grant in support of the Ravenswood Bay Trail. This is very exciting as we continue to ring the bay.
Hey everyone, Assemblymember Mark Berman here. I know that during the last couple of months with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've all come to appreciate even more the amazing open spaces and trails that we have here on the peninsula, where we can get out, get some exercise, and stay physically distant and stay safe. And I want to congratulate Midpen for the soon-to-be completed section of the Ravenswood Bay Trail, which will create additional access for the communities of Menlo Park and East Palo Alto to the bay. And I can't wait to get out there and enjoy it as soon as it's complete.
This trail has it all. It closes a critical Bay Trail gap. It offers access to the bay for residents of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And it provides a venue for wildlife viewing and environmental education. The San Mateo County Board of Supervisors invested $1 million of Measure K funding into this project, and we're sure glad we did.
Hi, this is County Supervisor Joe Simidian with a big congratulations all around on the Ravenswood Bay Trail project. This is a reminder how much more we can do when we work in partnership with others. This is a long-term project, it's a big picture project, and it is a reminder that persistence pays off. It is a way to connect the various communities in the Bay Area, and it means more than ever, in my view, when we start to talk about the importance of connection. So, it's a great trail connection, but more than that, it connects all of us as part of one larger community, and that's a good thing indeed. Congrats all around.
Hi, I'm Laura Thompson, manager of the San Francisco Bay Trail Project. Completion of the Ravenswood Bay Trail is a transformative event for our region. This trail completes the last gap in an 80-mile network connecting 8 cities across 3 counties, and it illustrates how the Bay Trail can function as a complete system. The Association of Bay Area Governments, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and the Bay Trail Project are pleased to have played a funding role in this project, including the initial grant that kickstarted the project using State Coastal Conservancy funds in 2005. Congratulations.
Closing gaps in regional trails has never been more important to get people back outside into the natural world. For the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, being part of the Ravenswood Bay Trail team has reminded us how environmental stewardship is interconnected with thoughtful recreation, while we provide high-quality drinking water to our almost 3 million customers in the Bay Area. We're happy to provide perpetual trail easement as part of the project. Enjoy the trail.
Hi, I'm Brenda Buxton from the State Coastal Conservancy. The Conservancy provided funding for some of the planning studies that were necessary to get this trail built. What the Bay Trail means to the Conservancy and the residents of the Bay Area is connection. Connection with each other and connection with the Bay, which is, after all, the defining feature of our region. And we really count on partners like Midpen to get this trail built. So we thank you for your perseverance.
Access to the Baylands is important to our program because it allows us to facilitate connections to nature between the local community and this valuable ecosystem. It also helps us to talk about crucial issues such as sea level rise and to think about creative solutions to safeguarding our community in the future. Our volunteers love to come out here and see the different plants and animals and birds that reside here at the Baylands.